All right, call into order the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commission meeting for August 1st, 2024. If we could have a pledge of allegiance, please. And Mr. Skinner, would you like to introduce again? Go ahead, lead us in the pledge for us. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and lead to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty for all. If we could have a roll call, Ms. Susan.
Brandon DeQueer.
Present.
Gene Reynolds.
Here.
Andrew Blanchard.
Here.
Andy Brister.
Here.
Kevin Segura.
Here.
Jonathan Walker.
Here.
Nathan Walls absent. Mr. Chairman, there are 6 commissioners in attendance and we have a quorum. Secretary Sheehan is also present.
Thank you, Ms. Susan. Gentlemen, before we motion for the approval of the agenda, I want to bring your attention to items 8 and 9. I would like to amend the agenda to go ahead and consider and vote on the proposals in addition to receiving the presentations. And if there's a motion to amend the agenda to vote on the proposals, I will entertain that at this time. Moved by Mr. Segura, seconded by Commissioner Reynolds. This will be a roll call vote because we have to have unanimity to amend the agenda. Ms. Susan, if you can please call the roll.
Andrew Blanchard. Andy Brister. Kevin Segura. Jonathan Walker.
Yes.
Gene Reynolds.
Yes.
Brandon DeQueer.
Yes. All right. So the agenda is now amended to consider the vote on items 8 and 9. Are there any other adjustments to the agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Motion by Commissioner Blanchard, second by Commissioner Reynolds. All in favor? Aye. All right,
Aye.
hearing no opposition, motion carries. All right, next we have the adoption of the commission meeting minutes from July 9. Is there a motion on the commission meeting? Moved by Mr. Segura,
Second.
second by Mr. Blanchard. All in favor?
Aye.
And ayes have it. Next, we'll move to the commission special announcements and personal privileges. Any commissioners have any special announcements, privileges?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I would
Certainly.
like to take a personal privilege moment to introduce my son, Jacob Brister. Jacob, raise your hand. There you go. Jacob is an attorney and practices law with me in Lake Providence, Louisiana.
Welcome, Jacob. Good luck with that profession. I hear it can be brutal, especially if you're working with a parent. I don't have any experience with that at all. All right, next we'll receive the enforcement report from Lieutenant Colonel Edward Skinner, and I believe he also has someone that he will be introducing to us.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. And once again, my apologies for the short notice, but we have just named my replacement who will be given the enforcement reports going forward. And this is Captain Davis Madair. Captain Madair will be heading our Special Operations Division, which is a newly created position. And Captain Madair will be in charge of that unit. He hails from the river parishes. He's been a game warden for about 26 and a half years. Started his career on the coast in what was then the old Region 9, which is now Region 6, Thibodeau office. Worked there for several years before being transferred to the strike force, did some special investigations, and later on to the oyster strike force. The majority, about 3 years ago, he came up to headquarters and has been assisting with a lot of administrative functions that happen in that building. The majority of his career has been on the coast doing coastal work, specifically focusing on the commercial industry. He has a broad range of knowledge, and I think y'all will find that his knowledge and expertise will be very helpful to you guys if you so need it. Anyway, he's going to give the report today. I apologize for being on short notice. Of course, I've made the adjustments with Ms. Susan, so hopefully the agenda reflects correctly next time. And with that, I'll turn it over to Captain Madair.
Welcome, Captain Madair.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Commissioner, esteemed members of the commission. The month of July, we investigated five total boating incidents, 2 injuries with 0 fatalities. Also, in the month of July, a total of 1,576 citations were issued. 598 of them were warnings, the rest being criminal and or civil violations, along with 49 public assistances. Some of the cases highlighted in the month of July, we had enforcement agents cited a woman in Lafourche Parish possessing over 50 spotted sea trout and possessing undersized spotted sea trout. Agents were on patrol in Leeville when they observed the subject fishing and stopped her to perform a licensing creel inspection. During the inspection, agents found her in possession of 55 spotted sea trout, all of which were under the legal size limit of 13 inches. Agents seized the fish and donated them to a local charity. In addition to the possible criminal fines and incarceration, the subject faces civil restitution totaling over $1,500 for the value of the replacement of the spotted sea trout. The second one is an Abbeville man was cited in Vermilion Parish for possessing over the limit of red snapper, possessing undersized snapper, as well as intentional concealment of the fish and failing to keep the fish intact. Agents received an anonymous tip about an offshore vessel coming into Vermilion Pass, dropping off several bags of snapper on the bank and then leaving. Agents responded to where the snapper were dropped off and set up surveillance on the area. The subject returned to the area and went straight for the snapper. And they found him in possession of a total of 33 snapper, 24 of which were gutted, and also 9 sets of fillets. 29 of the fish were under the 16-inch minimum size limit. They seized the snapper, donated them to local charity. In addition to criminal fines and possible incarceration, the subject faces civil restitution totaling $768 for replacement of the illegal fish. And finally, enforcement agents cited 4 Bro Bridge men and a juvenile in Lafayette Parish for theft of crawfish. Agents obtained video surveillance showing the 5 subjects checking crawfish traps and keeping the crawfish from those traps, which did not belong to them. The subjects ran the traps on 4 different occasions. During questioning, all of the subjects admitted they were not the owner of the traps they were running. Theft of crawfish when the crawfish have a value of less than $1,000 brings up to a $1,000 fine and not more than 6 months in jail. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner and Commission members. This concludes the enforcement report.
Thank you, Captain Madera. Any questions from the commission? All right, seeing none, we appreciate the report.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have a receiver presentation and proposal from Delta Waterfowl for the Waterfowl Breeding Grounds Conservation Fund work for fiscal year 25 through 27. And Mr. John Davis of Delta Waterfowl will be giving us a presentation. Welcome, Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Just a second. Good. Good morning. It's I think I'm going to take up residency down here. I've spent a lot of time in Baton Rouge recently, and begin by telling you how much we appreciate this opportunity, Madam Secretary, Chairman DeQueer, and commissioners and all the Louisiana staff to come back and do this partnership that is truly successful up north. My name is John Davis. I'm with Delta Waterfowl, and I've been working with you guys for years, and it's great to be back. I also want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Governor Landry, Secretary Sheehan, Chairman DeQueer, commissioners, and all the staff. You guys provided a rousing and heartfelt welcome to Delta recently as we hosted our international expo, Duck Hunters Expo here, brought in roughly 25,000 attendees from local and from across the U.S. and Canada, and had a wonderful time. So thank you very much for the welcome. It was very much appreciated. It was a great success for Duck Hunters of Louisiana. So now I go off script, and this is where I'm comfortable talking about ducks. We come to you all again this year to continue this successful partnership in securing breeding habitat on the prairies of Canada. Today, we'll talk a little bit about background, the problems we continue to face, both north of the border and south of the border. However, this funding specifically goes north of the border. A solution, the LWF and Delta partnership, and specifically the request. So myself, I apologize, you have to see that picture, but also want to talk briefly about the partnership with Manitoba Habitat Conservancy. And I think Jason came up this past year and had a good chance to really understand how that works and the efficacy of that partnership. So longtime friend Stephen is the leader of that group, which is a Manitoba and a form of a crown corporation, a Canadian entity. They happen to be the largest holder of conservation easements there in Manitoba, both in number of projects and acres. They've been on the ground for a long time, since the mid-'80s, doing this work, so they're trusted. That matters, right? When they show up in places where farmers are making a living and start talking ducks, which isn't always the most popular discussion. And through those partnerships, have received 65,000 acres of donated easement projects over time. So it's a truly effective organization. Of course, we in MHC are part of the joint ventures, the various Fall Flights Advisory Committee, implementation committees there in Manitoba, and in the recent NAWAMP plan update. It's a partnership that goes back. The way this works is basically MHC is the boots on the ground in Manitoba, and Delta acts on this side of the border to be that organization delivering grassroots support and securing the funding to do the work in Canada. We have a history of success. These are the green and dots and squares and triangles there. Those are the projects specifically that LWF has put on the ground since early 2000s. And to the left there, the overall acres as a result of these state partnerships here out of the U.S. funding the work in Manitoba. Delta, you guys know us. We are the Duck Hunters organization. We believe that we exist to produce ducks, secure the future of hunting, and our vision one day, times aren't bad now, but they can always be better, is abundant waterfowl and endless opportunity to pursue them. We do that through 4 strategic measures. That is, research underpins every move we make. We focus on duck production, we focus on habitat, and we are putting our mouth where our money is at. We're doubling down on this Hunter 3 space. Ducks, we kind of have figured out. Hunters, harder to figure out. And socially, our societies are moving further from a hunting culture. And with this North American model, the hunter is the reason we exist. So we continue to lead with that part of the chain, do things right by hunters in the state of Louisiana and across North America. So for this next funding cycle, we humbly request a 50% portion of those funds available. And hey, we've been working for a while to understand how those funds are generated, and we understand there's a change to that. So for the balance of this presentation, we just used a total available pool of 400,000, of which 50% would be 200,000. And so that's kind of what the numbers are based off that you'll see here. But we very humbly request this, and at the $200,000 investment annually from LWF, we propose to deliver 2,120 acres of high quality habitat. This is it. Why do we do this? There are many intrinsic reasons that we all find ourselves in a duck blind, but the future is now. And there's one thing that we know: if you don't have meaningful access to quality hunting, and when you're there, ducks in the sky, the interest fades, right? So we stay focused there, and this is our why. It's my why. And most everyone at Delta and at our partner Ducks Unlimited, this is why we do the work. So you guys have probably seen this for years, and you're like, John, why are you showing that thing again? We got it the first 2 times. It is evident, this Hoekman study, which I believe was actually funded by Ducks Unlimited, it's one of the most paramount studies on the landscape. These were prairie mallards, and as a surrogate of most of the other upland nesting prairie ducks, we clearly understand that duck numbers are driven by breeding ground events. Duck distribution is driven by wintering ground events. So in this part of the effort that you guys are working on, we are working on population. We are producing ducks. And I just wanted to reinforce, it's not only a rational thought. That's where nests are put down, eggs are laid, ducklings are raised, and yearling ducks fledge and fly out, it is scientifically supported that the breeding grounds are responsible for the number of ducks in the air. It's up to you guys to attract them here and distribute them across the landscape once water shows up. Can't do much about that. Kind of covered that slide, but there's two big parts to making sure we have the largest fall flight, and that is capacity, and that's where your investment goes. Hens must settle into the prairie where they're most productive. In years when it's dry, they will absolutely find places in the fringe or move to the boreal, or in Pintail's case, even move beyond the boreal, but we are dead in the water if we don't have pair ponds when they show back up. And then we're dead in the water when it gets to raising ducklings. Those ducklings must have some of that more permanent water on the landscape. In order for those ponds to become ducks, we've got to have nest success, duckling survival, and hen survival. And you've seen a lot of research probably in recent years about this trend towards sex ratios skewing far to drakes. And that's a representation of how dangerous it is to live on the ground. But you guys are investing in the perpetual capacity building, and that's exceedingly important. So there's absolutely a link between Manitoba and hunters of Louisiana. If we look here at this is just a raw direct recovery map, and the two jurisdictions represented, and I kind of just broke off the parts that the prairie and the parkland parts there. But you can see that, so this is a representation of ducks harvested in Louisiana and their derivation at banding sites. So it's you see dots over, but you're looking for those dark purple, and that shows a concentration of where direct recoveries, meaning hatchier birds, were recovered that were later where they were banded and later recovered in Louisiana. You know, I've talked about this point, but spatial diversity is key. No one knows where rain's going to fall. That's an act of God. Our job in this capacity building is to make sure there are buckets there to catch it. And you got to recognize that these buckets represent a barrier to income for the folks who own the land. So the trick here is to make friends with those folks. But in this spatial diversity, it's important to recognize how precipitation works across something from, north central Alberta to Iowa. That's a large piece of ground, and rain in some years, we love this year, it's green everywhere. So it rained everywhere. In this place, all boats left, and ducks are everywhere. And that's what we saw there through the mid 2010s were just remarkable numbers of ducks. Some years, rain falls somewhere. And this is the majority of the years, right? And so in this instance, we were out of drought in that southwest Manitoba quadrant there. And there was a bit more, and we like light yellow too. Slight yellow we can get by, but there was a little bit of drought there in South and East Saskatchewan. In other years, hey, there's a bright spot there in South and East Saskatchewan, and there's a deeper drought there in South and West Manitoba. So we would hope that there are plenty buckets in those places with the least amount of drought, the greatest amount of snow or early rainfalls. And so spatial diversity of your investment is absolutely important. And then there's years like this. We've experienced a lot of this on the Canadian prairie since really 2019, widespread drought. And in these years, these are some of the most important years. Yeah, it's dry everywhere. These are the years that we have flyover on the prairie, but more importantly, these are the years where the folks who own the land and to no fault had the opportunity to really get in and do work in these wetlands. And oftentimes that's in the form of drainage. So spring 2024, just always like to bring this insight. Hey, how are the ducks going to be this year? Good news is when they were completing the spring surveys, they started seeing ponds. Bad news is few birds on them, but it began raining mid-May. That's really important. And the rain began being reinforced with more normal type weather patterns. So not going to say it because I don't want to jinx it, but it seems that some more normal water patterns are beginning to happen on the prairie. However, ducks don't show up in May. Some of the late ones do and the renesters, And so this year we probably suffered from some early flyover, and most research will show ducks, once they fly over the prairie, they don't back up down into the prairie to nest. And so that was really important time window, which is short, from mid-April to mid-May, it was still dry. So probably suffered from a little flyover. The good news, those who did put a nest on the ground are probably going to have much better duckling survival, and those ducks that were good mothers and decided to go back and try again, probably had better success with those second nests. High quality habitat matters, and we focus on these areas that jointly all of the entities working here have created these maps with a number of scenarios here that we focus on. So we absolutely focus on delivering your dollars into high quality habitat. And again, I think Jason was able to come up and see that and felt good about the work being done. The problem has not gone, and I use this photo often because it was striking to me. So digging a little 1-foot ditch out of this and bringing it to the roadside, that's easy. That doesn't cost a lot. Drain tile is not easy and it costs, but it's, if you go to Minnesota, Iowa, you see every wetland has been drained and has tile. But I had never seen this in Canada until 2022. I don't know how, let's say there's 100 loads of dirt there. Let's say that it's a pretty big wetland, actually. It's an ephemeral wetland, but it's say 4 to 5 acres. And that is an immense cost to fill that wetland. That would take many years as a farmer to recover that. So we're now moving to a point where we're seeing desperate attempts, if you will, at filling, draining, tiling these wetlands in Canada. And that's not I hadn't seen it. Howie's spent his life and career up there. I had never seen that before. I had to pull over and take a picture of that. So at 0.88% per year, not much, right? We can live through that. Let's give it 20, 50 years, okay? Right now, what you're seeing in duck numbers is the result of a drought. Basically, we're enacting perpetual drought onto the prairie when we remove these wetlands from the settling pond, capacity. So we must continue to do this work. And in many jurisdictions, we see it not slowing down, but speeding up. Again, we humbly request your partnership, and we request 50% of that which is available to, in this scenario, deliver 2,120 acres of high quality breeding ground habitat in the jurisdiction of Manitoba. This is a general rundown, but you get the principle. You all put in that which is available. We, Delta MHC, match that. And then together we go to NACA and capture that 1-for-1 on, which would actually be 3-to-1 to your Louisiana dollars. With those acres, we propose to deliver, with those dollars, we propose to live 520 acres of LWF direct funded acres, match funds 1,600, both through perpetual and agreements and easements, for a total of 2,120. These key considerations, we never venture from these. Target landscapes, strong link between hunters here, ducks produced there, and spatial diversity of investment. Thank you. We have a track record of success through this partnership. We have 39 perpetual habitat conservation projects on the ground, from little bitty to much larger, 5,200 acres. And with that, I will say a heartfelt thank you to the state of Louisiana, the opportunity to petition for these funds, and rest assured we will deliver your dollars with efficacy and accountability. I don't know if now's the time for questions or.
Yep. Any commissioner questions? Certainly, go for it. Mr. Walker.
Yeah,
please.
thank you, John. So John, you mentioned when you do conservation work in Canada, you've listed a delivery partner. Does everybody doing conservation work in Canada have to have a Canadian partner? And I guess my second part to this question is, because if we're raising ducks throughout South Dakota and North Dakota, and then mainly the three provinces up in Canada, why would we even deal with Canada if we could raise more ducks maybe easier in North Dakota, South Dakota? Is it because, and not have to cross the border? Is it because there's the matching component once you cross the border? What's the reasoning there?
Yes, I was trying to keep track of all the questions there. So I'll do my best. Yeah, if we look at direct recoveries, there's a stronger correlation between North Dakota and the birds recovered here. However, and I'll say we don't deal with, we look for the privilege to work with our Canadian partners. So it's really a matter of jurisdictions and funding when it comes to that partner across the border and the knock a match. And so if you all recall, we were founded in Canada and over the years moved our business operations off the little old marsh to North Dakota. And it's primarily a function of being able to capture these NACA dollars. And don't get me into the deep organizational structure of charitable corporations in Canada. But yes, there's a component there specifically with those crown corporations and or registered charitable organizations, such that to capture these dollars, you need a Canadian-based entity as a business, corporation, LLC, et cetera, and a US-based entity to be petitioning for, in the same way ducks, DU and DU Canada are two different entities that exist as very close cousins. Did I get there?
Good, thank you.
Okay.
Any other commissioner questions, comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
All right, next we the way I can see this, we'll take both presentations and then we'll circle back to do a vote if that's okay with the commissioners. All right, next we'll receive a presentation from Ducks Unlimited for the Waterfowl Breeding Grounds Conservation Fund funding work for fiscal years 25 to 27, and Howie Singer will present on behalf of Ducks Unlimited. Welcome, Mr. Singer.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for having me here. Get this loaded up. Okay. As many of you know, my name is Howie Singer. I'm the manager of the Fall Flights program for Ducks Unlimited Canada. I'm here today to present the recently submitted proposal for funding from the duck license, stamp, and print funds that you all are fortunate to have. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the state of Louisiana for understanding the significance of waterfowl habitat conservation starting today, allocating all the revenue from the waterfowl licenses to the fund for waterfowl conservation work, half of which is allocated for breeding ground conservation work. So with that, let's get started. I showed this slide last month, and I believe it is immensely important to show it again. The Fall Flights program has been in existence in some form since Louisiana, South Carolina, and Ohio started sending money to the waterfowl breeding grounds in Canada in 1965. This program was and remains aimed at providing funding to protect and restore critical waterfowl breeding habitat in Canada. This past year, all 48 states contributed to breeding ground conservation work totaling over $5 million US. With the strong matching component and favorable exchange rate currently in existence for most of this program, that's more than $25 million last year was spent in Canada on breeding ground conservation for waterfowl. Having all states participate and being leaders in this program really keeps the waterfowl cog turning for habitat conservation. Before getting into the proposal itself, I want to touch a bit on what DUC is, Ducks Unlimited Canada. DUC is a science-based organization. We rely on the best available data to determine the where, what, how, and even the when we deliver conservation programs. The why is obvious, and that is to ensure fall flights of ducks keep coming south for you all. This image here is the cover of the 2021 through 2025 Prairie Habitat Joint Venture, often referred to as the PHJV, implementation plan. This is the go-to resource for science-based activities that help guide conservation planning in Canada for waterfowl habitat. DUC has been at the forefront of conducting the science research that has gone into the PHJV guidelines. The guidelines focus on protecting and restoring key landscapes that will help keep waterfowl populations at long-term averages. Within this joint venture, the groundwork is laid out for how we do what we do and where we do it. Given this, we'll now get into the proposal for funding from the LDWF for the next 3 fiscal years. As you would have seen in our proposal sent in a few weeks ago, Ducks Unlimited Canada is asking for the full $400,000 annually to deliver conservation easements and land purchases in Saskatchewan. Ducks Unlimited will leverage LDWF funds with an equal match from Ducks Unlimited and then a doubling from the North American Wetland Conservation Act, also known as NACA. So our proposal is showing the full 1.2 million. So this would be the amount of 400,000 annually for 3 years for LDWF, Ducks Unlimited, and NACA. So the total would be 4.8 million. And those are the numbers that I'll show here on subsequent slides. This slide here, I'll get into a little bit of detail on the different habitat programs. So this is a breakdown of the anticipated financial plan to spend LDWF and match dollars over the next 3 years. It's kind of a forward-thinking plan, thinking what the cost of conservation might be in 3 years, and we'll see some of that later on some future slides. As mentioned in the legislation, we will focus the LDWF funds only on perpetual conservation easements and also on land acquisition within the high priority landscapes of Saskatchewan, where breeding pair densities are a minimum of 20 to 30 pairs per square mile. This aligns with the legislation set forth as mentioned for the funding mechanism in Louisiana. We will utilize match funds in a little bit of a different manner, which kind of follows the PHJV guidelines that I touched on earlier. These funds will be used to cover the full suite of conservation programs that will help reach the goals of stabilizing or increasing duck populations to long-term averages. The guidelines recommend that different programs in different landscapes will be the best return on investment. I'm just going to take a minute to talk a little bit about some of these programs so you all understand what they are, because there's quite a few of them, as you can see. So the first two, they're conservation easements and acquisitions. Conservation easements are a collaborative effort between Ducks Unlimited and private landowners. Ducks Unlimited negotiates a one-time payment that is no greater than 30% of the fair market value, which we get from a professional appraisal. The land title is then updated with what they call no break, no drain cause, stating that any upland habitat that's good for nesting waterfowl and wetland habitat can never be broken or drained. So this easement stays with the title in perpetuity and will always be there even when the land is sold. Acquisitions or direct land purchases where DUC will hold the land title and manage the lands in perpetuity as waterfowl habitat. Given the high cost per acre of this program, there's multiple levels of internal vetting to make sure that your conservation dollars are being used to the best manner possible. So moving down now, conservation agreements. These are 10-year agreements with landowners to either keep existing perennial habitat intact or protect and convert annual cropland into perennial habitat for 10 years. While not as long as in duration as the easements and purchases, this program provides a short-term win in anticipation that the landowner will consider a more permanent CE or an additional 10-year term after the first contract would expire. And also it's going to provide great breeding habitat for the 10 years that the contract is going. The next one is fairly similar to the lease program. This is just basically an outright land rental. So we'll go to a landowner, we'll work with them, and we'll just rent this land for 10 years. If we can get a 20-year lease, we'll do that as well, because then we can control the landscape. So it's a little bit different than the agreement. We can hay it and graze it. That kind of maximizes the return on waterfowl. Whereas in the conservation agreement, the landowner can, graze a little bit earlier than we would like to. They can go in and hay a little bit earlier. We try to work with landowners, and most landowners do work with us and delay their haying a little bit more than a normal operation, which maximizes the benefit for waterfowl production and nesting. So moving down, wetland rebuilds. Ducks Unlimited Canada has been doing wetland work for over 85 years across the prairies. And many of the wetlands that DU originally worked on, they kind of come to their term. So we might have, put the dam up on a wetland to hold water, in the 1950s or 60s or 70s. And so these projects over time, they, water goes around them, you get a big rainfall, it washes out a dam. So Ducks Unlimited will go in and attempt to rebuild these wetlands. So we'll evaluate the wetland and ensure that the project is going to be a good use of dollars and also provide good habitat benefit for waterfowl. And then we'll work with the landowner and make an agreement to rebuild the wetland for another 30 years. Upland restoration, that's on the ground work needed that usually aligns with our conservation agreements. On lands that DUC purchases or owns, we can use a custom forage mix that has been shown through research to provide the best nesting cover for a specific geographic region. With lands under conservation agreements, the landowner can choose what mix of forages they will establish, as they may want to include or exclude certain species for cattle operations, yet still are going to provide breeding habitat for waterfowl. Then lastly, there are a couple winter cereals, which in the north are typically winter wheat, fall rye, and triticale. These are crops seeded after the harvest in September and left dormant over winter. And they provide amazing waterfowl nesting habitat that's been shown to increase nest success up to like 18 to 25 or 24 times greater than spring seeded habitat. And that's because you have this early growth in the spring. Pintails in particular, a species I know a lot of folks harvest here, really like to use bare fields in the spring. So if you have winter wheat on the landscape, pintails go in there and have a lot higher nest success. And then lastly, habitat management. This is all just, the match funds. These are lands that DUC owns. There's a lot of work to keep the habitat intact to make sure, every year it's the best it can be for nesting waterfowl. So we're going to spend a little bit of money on that. And then indirect, just some overhead costs. This is allowed through the North American Wetland Conservation Act, NACA. So that's only 6% of the match funds that we're allocating to that. So the next slide here is just going to show the breakdown of our cost per acre. So the cost per acre is the same whether we're using an LWF dollar or a match dollar. So you can see the first one, conservation easements, we're proposing it's going to cost us about $780 per acre across the 3 years to deliver conservation easements. And then land acquisitions are about $2,000. That's the purchase and long-term hold program. These costs are obviously what we expect the average to be over the next 3 years. So 1 year it might be a little lower, another year it might be a little higher, but overall it's going to average out to be this. And then going down, conservation agreements are 200, leases 700. The wetland rebuild, like I said, is a pretty expensive program. So we really want to make sure the wetland rebuild is going to provide the nesting habitat that waterfowl need, or good habitat for ducks in general. So as I mentioned, we're asking for funding just for the prairies of Saskatchewan. So that's kind of the bulk of this presentation. Why fund the prairies of Saskatchewan? These next few slides are going to focus on that. To sum it up, we'll focus on 4 main reasons. Saskatchewan has the majority of breeding ducks that come from the prairies, the highest percentages of Louisiana's most top 3 harvested species, the greatest area of the high priority landscapes, some major challenges with wetland loss, and lastly, the lowest conservation delivery cost currently. I'm going to go into a bit of detail on each of these. The Canadian prairies annually produce about 1/3 of the entire North American duck population. Within the prairies are the 3 provinces of Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan has the most land for breeding ducks and also the highest annual duck counts. When we look at breeding duck numbers for the Louisiana duck hunters' top 3 harvested species over the past 3 years, you can see why investing in Saskatchewan makes sense. Of all the Canadian prairie nesting ducks of these 3 species, over 60% of the blue wings and gadwall originate from Saskatchewan, and about 50% of the green wings originate here. And John talked a little bit about breeding ducks in North Dakota. There are a lot of breeding ducks in North Dakota. I looked at the data for blue-winged teal, and it's about, when you look at the whole population of the prairies, about half is in Canada, 60% of that comes from Saskatchewan, and the other half is kind of from the Eastern Dakotas. Last year, at least. I mean, I'm not sure what the average was, but that was last year. So looking at these same 3 species, we'll dive a little bit into the harvest data that kind of John had touched about as well. Being a science-driven organization, when we work with a state partner such as Louisiana, we are putting your dollars where it makes sense for your duck hunters. This map highlights the band return data from blue and green-winged teal and gadwall harvested by Louisiana duck hunters over the past 10 years or so. These 3 species combined made up almost 70% of Louisiana's harvest last year. When focusing on the Canadian prairies, where over 30% of all your ducks come from annually, you can see that the birds of Saskatchewan are much more significant for Louisiana duck hunters than either Alberta or Manitoba. We only focus state dollars there where banding data suggests there will be a strong connection to waterfowl for that particular state. Now looking at high priority landscapes, Saskatchewan is home to some really important target areas for breeding waterfowl. These areas with the red outline are the areas of the province where waterfowl populations are greater than 20 pairs per square mile. And these are the areas where we deliver conservation work. Those in the bright red within those boundaries are areas where breeding pair densities are 60 plus pairs per square mile, which are the best breeding waterfowl areas in the province. Saskatchewan has almost 25 million acres of habitat to conserve within these target landscapes, and it has the highest percentages of 40 plus pairs per square mile of all of the 3 provinces. Now scaling out a bit to the prairie landscape, you can see the vastness of the Saskatchewan landscape in the middle of Alberta and Manitoba. Thinking about wetland loss for a minute, John touched on this also. Saskatchewan is the only province of the 3 without a formal wetland retention policy. An estimated 10,000 wetlands are lost annually in Saskatchewan. Both Manitoba and Alberta have fairly decent wetland policies that are considered no net loss. So currently in Saskatchewan, the only way we can keep wetlands in the landscape is through conservation work. Now moving on to lowest conservation delivery costs, Saskatchewan has those as well. I've shown the average cost per acre already for Saskatchewan for our 2 biggest programs, CEs and acquisitions. You can see that delivery costs are the least expensive in Saskatchewan and also provide the greatest return on your investment, as evidenced by the proportions of breeding ducks, harvested ducks, and high priority landscapes for Louisiana. Taking it one step further, Ducks Unlimited Canada has built a tool that allows us to annualize all conservation programs so we can compare return on investment on each program in terms of ducks. Every project that DUC delivers utilizes this tool. The cost tool combines decades of research by Ducks Unlimited Canada, along with conservation costs, risks of habitat loss, and land values, amongst others, to ensure we are using conservation dollars in the best way. This map shows the cost tool for delivering conservation easements across the prairies. As you can see currently, it's the most economical for conservation easements to be delivered in the middle of the prairies in Saskatchewan. Those light green colors represent the lowest cost per hatch nest, which is the metric the Prairie Habitat Joint Venture uses to determine a gain or loss in waterfowl breeding populations from long-term averages. So Saskatchewan currently is showing the best for CEs. This slide I actually just pulled up on Monday right before I sent my presentation in. If there's ever a time to fund Saskatchewan, now is it. Recent articles such as this and anecdotal accounts have shown that land prices are ever increasing in Saskatchewan. This article went into detail about Saskatchewan lagging behind the other 2 provinces in terms of land values, but will likely catch up and be more on par. So while we are currently at a point where we can deliver one of the cheapest costs for conservation on CEs and purchases and provide the best return on investment for Louisiana duck hunters, this won't always be the case. In summary, we will use the LA dollars awarded with the best reassurance for return on investment that Louisiana duck hunters can get. This will be done by investing across a massive area in Saskatchewan that currently has the lowest conservation costs, one of the greatest conservation needs, and will provide Louisiana duck hunters the most ducks this upcoming and all duck seasons going forward. Thank you for nearly 60 years of a strong partnership in conservation. Without states like Louisiana and all in the fall wouldn't be what it is today. So on behalf of Ducks Unlimited, I would just like to say thank you, and I hope you'll consider funding this proposal. If there's time for questions, I'd be happy to take some.
Thank you. Any commissioner questions or comments?
I've got one, Brandon.
Certainly, please, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Singer. Just one quick question about the slide of the banding data.
Yeah.
So we see the majority of ducks killed in Louisiana are coming from Saskatchewan. Do you have any data about how many birds are being banded in Saskatchewan compared to other places? Because I just want to make sure we're not looking at it the wrong way. If more
Yeah.
birds are banded in Saskatchewan, then obviously more birds are going to be killed.
That's
from
a
that.
very good question. So the fall flights, which I touched on earlier, is looking at doing a new banding derivation. So that actually takes into account data for population size and how many birds are marked. So I'm not sure currently, but I know last year proportionally, there was a higher percentage of birds marked in Manitoba actually than there would have been like compared to the population. So let's just say there's 500 birds marked in Manitoba. If you mark 250, your sample is going to be skewed to Manitoba. Last year and the year before, there's been a lot more birds marked in Manitoba. So that would actually skew the data to Manitoba. But this data is uncorrected for what we call banding effort. That data is being worked up right now by an external organization. Todd Arnold from the University of Minnesota is kind of working on updating that for all of the Mississippi Flyway. So then we can really get a good look at it. And I took mallards out of here. I know Dave showed mallards last time. That's not, you guys aren't shooting mallards anymore. I'm sorry, but looking at the data, it's these three species. So I wanted to get something that's more representative for you all.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other commissioner comments, questions?
Thank you. It was a very good presentation. Appreciate it. No other questions?
No good, no. I'll entertain any motions at this point.
Okay, yeah, I'll make a motion that we use the duck stamp monies that coming from Louisiana to fund 50% for each organization for Delta and Ducks Unlimited.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Got a properly motioned by Mr. Segura to use the duck conservation funds at 50% for each of the two proposals, with a second by Mr. Walker. Before we vote the motion, we're going to run through public comments. For purposes of clarity, for item 8, I have comment cards for folks that do not wish to speak, but see, I have, I think it's Mr. Leach. Brian Leach is in favor of Proposal 8. Darren Fournette in favor of Proposal 8. Tom McGee in favor of Proposal 8. Harold Doucette in favor of Proposal 8. And then I think this is Justin. Can't see quite the last name. In favor of Proposal 8. And then for those that did not wish to speak on item number 9, that are in favor of item number 9, Zach Brown, Austin Mouton, Jimmy Suarez, Ariel Alonso, Charlie Alonso, and Troy Dubois, all in favor of item number 9. For those that did wish to speak, I have Mr. J. Owen. Just trying to figure out if that was a IW. Come on up, sir. It looks like OIURN. That's what I was about to get real fun pronunciation up here. No, that's you, sir. You owned it. You come on up.
First of all, I want to tell you that I appreciate the commissioners and y'all's service. It takes a lot to sit in that position and not only listen to proposals on the breeding grounds, but all the other issues that y'all deal with every time that y'all are here, whether you're, one thing about Louisiana, whether it's a fisherman, a hunter, trapper, or whatever, everybody's passionate about what they do. And I just want to give you all of you a heartfelt thanks for the service. Jonathan, you asked some wonderful questions up there, and congratulations on your appointment. I want to thank the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. They work tirelessly on whether it's enforcement or education or habitat or whatever. They do a fantastic job, and I could not be more impressed with them. My name is Jay Owen. I currently sit on the board of directors of Ducks Unlimited, and I'm a senior flyway vice president. So I have the duties of overseeing the fundraising operations in Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. I have spent time on the ground in Manitoba and in Saskatchewan, hunting and learning about the habitat up there. And it's all great breeding grounds. I could not be more happy that we have organizations that are doing the work up there to protect it. I'm a little biased, okay, is because my heart is with the Louisiana hunter in South Louisiana. And I buy my hunting stamp, my license here, and I hunt here. And I know a portion of that goes to habitat. Ducks Unlimited has worked in Canada for over 50 years with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fishery doing the crucial habitat work that needs to be done up there. I've seen it, I've experienced, and it's great. But as a hunter from Louisiana, I want Louisiana to invest the dollars as wisely as they can for me. So the ducks, when they fly down here, they fly past Kevin and come to my blind. Because I don't know, Kevin, can you shoot? I've heard stories. I just happen to be, my lease just happens to be just south of Kevin's lease. So I got to give him a little bit of a hard time, but I do want the best return for Louisiana dollars. I think that Ducks Unlimited matches the Louisiana dollars dollar for dollar. The organization, DU, we've heard about the organizations here in the continental United States, our sister organizations in Canada, and Ducks Unlimited matches those dollars dollar for dollar. Then grants are written against that money in the habitat area. I do not think that there is a better investment for my dollars that are going to the breeding grounds, the statutory fund from the sale of licenses that are going to the breeding grounds, than what Ducks Unlimited is doing. So again, I want to thank y'all for everything that y'all do. And my concern is, as a Louisiana hunter, is that we're conserving the correct habitat that is bringing ducks to Louisiana. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next we have Mike Binge.
Thank you, gentlemen. I too am a Louisiana duck hunter. My family manages the Delacroix Corporation down in New Orleans, 100,000 acres of coastal marshland, 35,000 acres roughly in St. Bernard Parish, 65,000 acres in Plaquemines Parish. And duck hunting is a way of life for us down there. I'm also a board member of Ducks Unlimited. In full disclosure, I'm the Senior Vice President of Development. And I too have been to the breeding grounds many, many times to see not only our work there, but to hunt and enjoy the atmosphere up there. And it's an incredible landscape. Commissioner asked a question about working in North Dakota and south of the Canadian border. And Ducks Unlimited does work there, and I'm sure Delta works there in North Dakota as well. I believe there are offices there, if I'm not mistaken. But the reality of it is, when I was up there last September for a dedication of a project in my honor in Saskatchewan, the CEO of Ducks Unlimited out of Putnam said that it kind of was, we drove around the countryside, there are a lot of Louisiana projects in Saskatchewan. And we were up there, we did my project. We did a project for Eric Beyer of Boat Stuff. We also went by the John Newman project, all Louisiana people who raised money to put projects on the ground in Saskatchewan. But Adam Putnam said, it reminded him when we were driving around, is why do we work here in Saskatchewan? So it reminded him of John Dellinger, the great bank robber of the Depression era. Why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. So again, why do you work in Saskatchewan? That's where the ducks are. The banding surveys tell us that the majority of banded recovered ducks in Louisiana, the majority, come from Saskatchewan. And I believe it's about 37%, which you say that's maybe not that great of a number. I believe it's about 23% from Manitoba and about 19% from Alberta. So about 75% roughly of the banded birds come from that prairie pothole region. But the majority, 37%, come from Saskatchewan. With that, I'll sit back down and ask you to consider the numbers of where the best bang for the buck will come from. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Pierre Muldoon.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for having us here today. I understand this is a tough decision and what you'll have to do. I've been involved with Ducks Unlimited since I was 7 years old. I've been the PR guy for the state for the last 12 years, and I've heard every single end of what we're doing, what we're not doing, and so forth, and what's DU doing for the state, and why we send money to breeding grounds and everywhere in between. As being a hunter and a Louisiana resident and a follower of our good Lord, you know, I've always been a believer that if you take, you need to give. As hunters, the nature gives us what we have, and we take it. In order to give back, we have to send what we can, and we do this, all of us here, by being members of a conservation organization, because without us, there is nothing. But as a lot of other folks have said before me, we're here over money that is scarce, and because of that, we must be good stewards of that. And we have to give the best bang for the duck for the buck. And as you see that, you know, we both do great work, but if you set off an airplane from up there, they've got to have somewhere to land, and Ducks Unlimited has put airports down south to do that. So in order to come here and take our money to send up there, you got to give them somewhere to be down here. And not to compare, but we do great work. And I've walked Saskatchewan. I've been there in September. I was actually in North Dakota in June. I've seen Delta's facility. Gentlemen, we're in a dying industry. We're in a sport that really needs us. And a lot of it's because we haven't had birds. I hear it every day on the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So as I encourage you to do this, land's going up, value's going up. We have to maximize the most we can before it gets out of the reach of our value. So thank you. And I hope you reconsider.
Thank you. Last comment card is from Cassidy Lejeune.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Cassidy Lejeune. I work for Ducks Unlimited in Lafayette, Louisiana. I'm the manager of our Lafayette field office and oversee various conservation programs that we deliver in South Louisiana. From time to time, I hear comments and questions about LWF spending state funds in Canada. Folks wonder why the money isn't being spent in Louisiana here in our backyards. And then further, the question comes up, well, what is DU doing? What is LWF doing for waterfowl in Louisiana? So I have two quick comments on that subject. First and foremost, sending money to the breeding grounds is the right thing to do for conserving North America's waterfowl populations. If you take any steps to help conserve duck habitat, that's surely the first one. So thank you guys for the many decades of partnering with DU to do conservation work in the prairie pothole region. It's critically important to Louisiana's duck hunters and Louisiana in whole. Second, I wanted to point out that waterfowl work is happening in Louisiana. It's happening by LWF, by their staff, by DU, and through a partnership with DU and LWF. Our partnership dates back to the mid-1980s with a couple of water control structures that we delivered and put in at Marsh Island Refuge back in 86, 87. And that partnership has blossomed from there. Over the past 12 months, DU spent approximately $21 million on conservation work wetlands and waterfowl conservation work in Louisiana. And a good portion of that 21 million was spent in partnership with LDWF. About 23% or 4.7 million of that 21 million was done through the DU and LDWF partnership. During these last 12 months, we had projects on multiple LDWF properties, including Rockefeller Refuge, Marsh Island Refuge, White Lake Wetland Conservation Area, Atchafalaya Delta Wildlife Management Area, Timken WMA, and Paso Lucha Wildlife Management Area. We actually have equipment on the ground at Paso Lucha right now doing some crevasse work. And we have more construction work that should be kicking off later this year at Russell Sage WMA, Bicol WMA, and at Marsh Island Refuge. We're actually going to replace one of those first structures we put in back over 30 years ago. Altogether, we have about $6 million in our pocket in NAWCA funding that we plan to spend on LDWF's properties moving forward into the future in Louisiana. And although over the past 12 months, we've also partnered with LDWF's waterfowl program, working on a couple of private lands programs, the Louisiana Mottled Duck Project and Louisiana Waterfowl Project. We partnered with them funding-wise and working hand in hand on conserving habitat in Louisiana. So I'll wrap this up in just saying that I wanted everyone to be aware of the volume of work that we do here in Louisiana in partnership with you guys. And I hope us doing work in Louisiana through y'all and with y'all on y'all's property hand in hand helps y'all consider where to put the money in Canada. I hope that our partnership provides you guys comfort in moving forward with funding our DU proposal presented by Howie. Thank you.
Thank you. Having no more comment cards, are there any last observations or comments from the commissioners? All right. Sure, Mr. Walker.
I'll say one more thing, and I apologize for continuing to comment, but I'm the duck hunter on the commission, so I always have additional questions, and I think I'd do a disservice if I didn't respond to Jay and Mike, Pierre, and Cassidy. Appreciate you guys coming up and giving public comment. I don't want to speak on behalf of the commission, but for me personally, I don't think this is an issue with who's better, who does it better on the landscape, because I think as much as we like to control where we're spending our dollars, whether it's in Louisiana or on the breeding grounds, at some point, and John Davis mentioned this in his proposal, you can only control so much, and then God's got to give you the rain. And so that's why I think it's important that we've got two very qualified organizations that we can consider giving funding to, because, for instance, 2 years ago, Saskatchewan was very dry. Now we're in a little bit of a better situation where Saskatchewan and Manitoba have plenty of water. But if we were to fund just one area, let's say, or one pothole or one wetland, and then you get a drought for 2 or 3 years, then you put all your eggs in one basket. So I think we've got the opportunity to fund not only two great organizations, but two locations to where we can diversify our funds a little better. So, thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, for your comment. Any other? All right. So on the floor, we have a motion made by Kevin Segura, Commissioner Segura, to allocate the Duck Conservation Fund, if I said that right. It's Duck Conservation Fund. All right. Or Duck Stamp Fund.
Duck Stamp Breeding Grounds Fund.
Duck Stamp Breeding Grounds Funds. Thank you. 50% to Delta Waterfowl proposal and 50% to the Ducks Unlimited proposal. And that motion was seconded by Mr. Walker. If we're ready to vote, we can go ahead and vote. Commissioners, all in favor of the motion as presented?
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. Congratulations to both organizations. We hope you continue to do the work that is necessary for our ducks. All right. Item number 10, I believe Mr. Peyton Cagle will give us a presentation on the declaration of emergency for the opening date of the fall 2024 inshore shrimp season.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, commission members. As was stated, I'm going to present the data for our white shrimp. This is going to be our most recent data and our biological opinion for the opening of the fall inshore season. Before I do so, I wanted to present a little bit of information showing some shrimp data and some shrimp trends of white shrimp. I will start off showing annual shrimp landings in Louisiana. That's your orange bars. That's associated with the left axis. In blue, that's your dockside value. Millions of dollars is your right axis. So this 10-year period here, obviously you can see 2014 that was our last really big year in this 10-year period. 115 million pounds landed with a value of $237 million. As we progress forward, 2015 through 2018, slight fluctuations, but each year over 90 million pounds. But once we get to 2019, you start seeing a decline, dropping to 84 million. Further in 2020, we saw further decline to 70 million. This was associated with that COVID pandemic that we all dealt with, closures of restaurants. And again, we had a lot of tropical storm activity, not just threats, but several direct hits. 2021 landings did go up slightly, 74 million. 2022 up to 80 million. Last year, we dropped back down to 70. So landings over this past several years, we've definitely seen declining. Interesting thing to point out in 2021, when you look at the landings of 74 million pounds, you see a dockside value of 131 million. The following year, we went up to 80 million pounds, but the dockside value dropped to 110. Last year, we fell back down to 70 million pounds, only 58 million dockside value. So now we're going to look at white shrimp only. Same year, same time span, but just the white shrimp landings and dockside value in Louisiana. So 2014 through 2019, little fluctuation as you see, but landings still remained above that 60 million mark. So we were good, with the exception of 2018, fell below. So what I said last slide with 2019 seeing that downward trend, you didn't really see it with white shrimp until we got into 2020. Again, with COVID and all the hurricanes for the fall season, you did see that drop down to 55 million. We did increase though, up to 58 million by 2021. 2022, very successful season in white shrimp landings at 68 million pounds. And then we fell back down last year back to 58. As I pointed out with that dockside value of 2021, you see 58 million pounds landed, 110 million dockside value. That good year, 68 million, only 100 million dockside. Last year, yes, we were at 58 million again, but only $50 million for that dockside value. This is going to emphasize what I'm showing. This is your white shrimp price per pound by count size. So at the bottom, you have your count sizes, familiar with 1620s, 2125. So larger sizes on the left, smaller to the right, and then your prices for that is on your y-axis. The gray is your 2021 data. 2022 is your yellow, and the blue is 2023 value. That red line is 10 years. As I kept pointing out, 2021, we saw those high values. Well, that's clear here. You can see every count size exceeded the 10-year average. When you shifted over that 1 year to 2022, where we started seeing that decline in prices, it's apparent here. The only prices that were equal to those 10-year averages were those smaller sizes. And that further decline we saw in 2023, you can see that with every count, price per pound per count declined. To go with the declining landings and prices, to see that, I wanted to show some effort data. So this is different types of shrimping effort data. These are 2023 data changes compared to, as you see, the 5-year average, a 10-year average, and since 2000. And we have license sales. So 2023 license sales compared to the previous 5 years, down 17%. 10-year average, down 25%. And we're down nearly 40% since 2000. One of the big ones you see is the Fishers reporting landings. So from 2023 compared to the previous 5-year average, we're down almost 30% in the actual numbers of individuals that completed trip tickets. Since 2000, that's 55%. And you can also see we continue to see declines in annual trips. So now to present on some current 2024 fall inshore white shrimp data. All samples were conducted last week. The presentations were prepared this week, and here we are today showing it. So start out with just a little bit of information for those who may not be familiar. In the blue here, you see zone 1. Zone 1 reflects the Pontchartrain upper and lower portions. Zone 2 is yellow. It's a very large area that incorporates the Barataria, East and West Terrebonne basins, and the Vermilion Teche Basin. And zone 3 is Mermentau, Calcasieu, and Sabine basins. So now we're about to talk about zones. So that zone 1, that area, the upper and lower Pontchartrain basins. This is white shrimp catch per unit effort from last week, 2024 on the right, catch per unit effort, 181. That time series average, and it's not a true 10-year average because as you'll see, like 2015 is missing. That means during 2015 for that particular week, samples were not conducted. So that's why you don't see it in the comparison. So this is an 8-year average, but 8-year average is 44. Current CPUE 181. So we're seeing really high numbers of shrimp. Remember, I pointed out in 2022, 68 million pounds of white shrimp were landed. You see that it had a high CPUE also. Currently, we're seeing higher numbers of shrimp within the zone. With those higher numbers of shrimp in this area, it's very common that we see large numbers in that interior Biloxi marsh. And that was the case this time also. So to do it, a true comparison and not look at just overall average sizes, we break this down to show you zone 1, all the open areas, open water versus just the interior Biloxi marsh. And you can see it at the top in your size frequency. Your size classes are on the bottom, your count sizes. And this is showing the percent in each size class as a whole of our samples. So what percent out of 100 each size class make up. And you see in the open water there, good numbers of 3135 at 5%, 4%, 3640s. You continue that trend of those mid-size, smaller size marketable shrimp going up to 6, 8, even 9% at the 8000s. But when you look at the interior marsh, more than 50% of your shrimp are in those 400 count all the way up to 1000 count. So smaller shrimp in there, very abundant resource in there, but because it's smaller, it's not going to cross over at the same time. So in order we break these down, we break it separate. So that zone 1 open water, this is your crossover. That's showing when 50% of the available resource crosses over to 100 count. That's deemed marketable. The blue line is a 50 count line just to show you what percent in those areas would also be at 50 count. So you can see at the top, zone 1 open water, again, samples conducted last week. That data crossed last week. So those shrimp, as you saw in that size frequency, were already large enough, 50% already over 100 count or bigger. So that data is already crossed. That interior marsh of Biloxi marsh that we talked about, that crossover date does not happen until the 13th of August. So we shift westward to zone 2. We pull out Vermilion, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that when we get to Vermilion, but Barataria, Terrebonne are very similar in what you see in overall sizes of shrimp. That happens, not the case for Vermilion. So this is zone 2, Barataria, Terrebonne only. Again, white shrimp CPUE at 44, you're looking at, or 42, I'm sorry. And you're looking at the catch per unit effort average over this time series, 22. So doubling the series nearly. We're much higher than we were in 2022 when we saw those good landings. So it's very positive signs that we have good numbers of white shrimp in the system. When you look at the size frequency for this area, again, you see a good mix. We already have some of those larger sizes in the basins going into the mid sizes at 4%. You have a lot of those remaining at 6+%. So with that, the Barataria and Terrebonne portions of zone 2, that data crossed over on July 29th, which was this past Monday. Zone 2, just Vermilion by itself. And Vermilion is typically white shrimp only. They don't support a brown shrimp fishery there. They have very low salinities year round. That's not conducive for brown shrimp. So they house white shrimp annually, year round, pretty much. So you see a lot larger sizes there throughout the entire sampling period. CPUE there, 106, which is better than our average of this time series of 77. Not as high as what we saw in 2022, but anytime we have higher than average CPUEs, we look forward to it. Again, as you see these sizes that I mentioned here, looking at 3135s at 7%, 3640, 7%. So you see much higher percent of those larger and even mid-sized shrimp. Again, this data was collected last week, and this area for vermilion crossed over past that 50% threshold last week. For our final zone, zone 3, that's far west. Again, CPUE slightly above the average of this series. It's 49. The CPUE average was 42. Again, 2022, very high numbers in this area. We're not there yet. We did see an influx 2 weeks before we sampled last week. So we feel, and then we had all the rain. So it's possible a lot of the shrimp that we saw earlier on just dispersed and are still in there. So still positive signs here, but similar to what you saw over in Biloxi Marsh, you got all of that percentages in those smaller sizes, in those 200, 300, 400 plus count sizes. This area for zone 3 does not cross until August 12th. That's when we meet the 50% threshold. So with that, with the data as presented, the biological opinion for zone 1, remember the open waters crossed over last week. So the earliest recommended time that we could open that, which would be August 5th, we're recommending. That portion of Biloxi Marsh that you saw all those small shrimp in, it crossed over the 13th. We're recommending the 12th for consistency because of zone 3. As we move over to zone 2, Bear Terrier Terrebonne, again, you saw that data. Those two areas combined had a crossover of the 29th this past Monday. Again, we're recommending the earliest possible time, August 5th. Now, these fishermen in this area, it's a preference for them to have a PM opening. So for that portion, we do recommend it be August 5th at 6 p.m. The rest are all AM. Vermilion, again, you saw it crossed over last week. So early as possible, August 5th, 6 a.m. And then that's a portion of zone 3 to open August 12th at 6 a.m. also. And right before I take any questions, just to say, yesterday, the Louisiana Shrimp Task Force met. I presented the biological recommendation and data to the Shrimp Task Force. The Shrimp Task Force did pass a motion unanimous to go with the department's recommendation. So with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman,
Chairman.
I'm the least likely to have a question, but I do.
I'm glad to see Mr. Brister with a question. I know there's so much shrimping activity up here in Providence. Let's hear it.
So, first question, why do some people want PM openings? What's the deal there?
It's just a preference for those guys in that area. A lot of people fish white shrimp at nighttime. Vermilion and Calcasieu, they actually have a ban. So you can't PM fish in Vermilion. You can over in zone 1. So that's just a preference issue with the fishermen.
So there was a gentleman named George, and I can't remember his last name.
Bearsich.
Okay, that's his last. There you go. So you know who I'm talking about.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know him. He randomly called me yesterday, and his preference was to open everything on the 12th, to have one day. Wait, what do you know? I didn't understand why, really, but what was he getting at, or do you know?
I mean, sometimes for the simplification of things at times to where you know, there used to be a concern and a fear of if areas open before other areas, people from those closed areas would traverse over to the open areas and start fishing. So you got added pressure, less shrimp per individual from that. So the more you can get open at one time, everybody has a fair shot. And I agree 100% with that. But as you saw in those numbers of the decline of the fishermen, you know, we're down to 26 or 1,600 fishermen. 2014, it was 2,600. So we're not seeing that near as much anymore. plus with the higher expenses and the lower dockside value of shrimp, it's not near of a concern.
Well, that may have been what he was getting at, is that over here in your map where it shows at the bottom, the different zones and the openings, it appears that there is one zone that opens on the 12th that's surrounded by another zone that opens on the 5th. So maybe that's what he was getting.
Yes, so that's enclosed marsh, that southern southwestern boundary of that area, that's the Mr. Go. The eastern is the actual double rig line, which is in statute. And then the upper portion is that southern border of Lake Bourne. So it's a pretty easily defined area. We've done this several years now, in the past couple of years. And as you saw in 2022, I mean, even as you saw in overall landings, we have not had as near of a decline in white shrimp. And I mean, this seems to work when it's needed.
Right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other commissioner comments? I
Yeah,
know
I'll-
Mr. Blanchard,
yeah.
you,
I'll go
So-
ahead. Peyton, again, great presentation. I got the opportunity to see it 2 days in a row. So it's a good, great presentation right there. And I'm gonna just answer Andy's question a little bit about, he was wondering about the different zone and all, right there. And, we look at, the shrimp, we trust on the biology that's given to us through the department. But when you look at like zone 2, the crossover date was in July 29th. I think that's what I saw up there. So really the season should have been open a week earlier on the 50% crossover, right there. And I can tell you with all the rain that we've had in the last 2 to 3 weeks, a lot of that population of shrimp has gone into the Gulf, already. So, we need to get this season open up as soon as we can, just to let them fishermen go out and try to catch what they can. And, with the potential of a storm entering the Gulf again next week, that could cause a lot of problems also. So with that being said, I'll make a motion that we go with the department's recommendation of opening up the zones as presented by you, with it. And other than that, I think everyone will be satisfied right there. Thank you.
is there a second on that motion? Got a motion by Commissioner Blanchard to accept the department's recommendation for the opening of the fall inshore shrimp season, and a second by Commissioner Segura. Any further questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none, we'll vote the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Cagle.
Thank you.
I believe, is that it for you? Or no, you
No,
have
sir.
derelict, I'm sorry, number 11. So we're receiving, consider a notice of intent to establishing closure of certain waterways associated with the 2025 derelict crab trap removal program. Say that 10 times fast.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commission members. Yes, so as stated here, I'll present a little overview of what was done this year in our February, March cleanups, and then we'll move into the proposed 2025 closure areas. So starting with the 2024 derelict crab trap results, as you remember, for this February and March, we had established 6 closures. The first one was over in the Mermentau Basin, very small area, just that portion of the river up to Catfish Locks. Never been closed before. We want to make sure that if it's in our areas and we can work it because it's public land, then we want to try to get a closure in there and remove those traps. Second closure was the western portion of Vermilion Test Basin. The third closure was between Dulac and Dularge and Terrebonne. The fourth closure, again, small closure area down by Venice. Never been closed down there before, so we wanted to make sure that we're incorporating it, see what's in there, get rid of any problems that may exist. That fifth closure was in the southern portion of Lake Bourne and into the Biloxi Marsh. And the last one was Lake Maurepas. So the results from those, that first Pontchartrain Basin closure, which was the one in Lake Bourne and St. Bernard, took place from the 1st of February to the 14th. We removed 451 traps. That's actually much lower than we thought. So we thought that we were going to be over 1,000 in this area. So the fact that between cleanups that, we're seeing marginal traps is actually a good sign, meaning, fairly responsible fishing. So that's a good sign. That Barataria Basin, also February 1st to the 14th, that small area never been cleaned in down by Venice, 119. That's all we could find covering the area. The Terrebonne Basin area, that's that area between Dulac and Dularge, all the way south, from the 1st of February to the 14th. We did get 733 traps out of there. There was room to get more. We actually partnered with the contractor for this cleanup, and we had some issues with the contract. We got held up. The contractor was not able to get the number of days we originally planned. So there is some room for error to go back in there and finish cleaning it up in the future. Vermilion Tesh Basin, also the 1st to the 14th. We got 212 traps. That Marmontel River area, also the 1st to the 14th. Got 45 traps out of it. Pontchartrain Basin, late February into early March. Lake Maurepas never been cleaned up before. We were able to recover 582 derelict or abandoned crab traps out of that area, totaling 2,142 traps for this year. Program results. You've seen this before probably. If you've been here, this is kind of a breakdown of the program. It started in 2004. For those first 2 years of operation, 2004, 2005, a total of 6 areas were closed. That amounted to an annual trap average of 5,759. From 2006 to 2016, things kind of slowed down, had less spatial closures each year. So during that time span, there were 16 closures across the Louisiana, and we averaged annually 1,441 traps. Since 2017, things have ramped up. We've had a total of 40 closure areas, and we're averaging right now 3,757 traps per year. You can tell by this year's numbers, they were a little below that. But we total 57,424 traps removed since the program. So now we go into our proposed areas for this coming year. First, we'll touch on the derelict crab trap removal program legislation, Louisiana Revised Statute 56:332. What does this do? This gives the commission the authority to designate area trap closures, who's able to collect these traps, the disposal sites, the date of the trap closures, and the disposition of traps, which was added in the language a few years back. And in that NOI, you'll see that there's language designating the secretary the authority from the commission for the secretary to determine the disposition of these traps. And this has been something ongoing that we've been trying to look into between different options of recycling, repurposing, using them for living shoreline projects. If something comes up, we want to have the secretary the authority to approve those traps to be used for these other projects. Also with that, the authorized dates that these closures can take place during the winter, that's between the 1st of February through the 31st of March. A closure can take place in conjunction with the spring inshore shrimp season for up to 14 days. And then anytime that there's a closure for biological or technical reasons, we can also prohibit the use of crab traps and do cleanups during them. So the proposed areas, there's 5 of them total. The first one, this is, we'll look at them in more detail and we'll go over them like that. That'll be easier. This is a zoomed in map of that first closure. This is Lake Pontchartrain. This is the western portion from the causeway. And we plan to close the entire thing from February 1st through February 14th. The second closure, this is in Vermilion Basin. That's the Acadiana Navigation Channel on the left border. The eastern portion is that eastern portion of Marsh Island North. That's our central area that we close, like you saw the western closure this previous fall, or February, I'm sorry. And this closure, again, February 1st through the 14th. Our third closure is in the Barataria Basin. This is the upper portion This is from Lafitte down to just south of Little Lake and on the eastern side, Wilkinson Canal. And this would be from February 8th through the 21st. See, we got a little bit of staggered dates here. The reason for that is we plan on continuing partnering with contractors. So if we're going to have a contractor agree to work 2 different basins for 8 days each, we want to give them as much time as possible. So we're going to stagger some of these openings or closures. Sorry. The Terrebonne Parish, this is between Dulac and Cocodrie, all the way down south. Top border is just north of Lake Boudreaux, and this would be February 15th through the 28th. And the last proposed closure, this is the northern half of Calcasieu Lake. There's never been a closure here, so we want to make sure that we incorporate that into our rotation as we bounce around these closures. It's a little bit shorter. It's all open water, not marsh, so you traverse open water in transects. You look at it, don't need as many days. The proposed is February 17th through February 26th. And some of the things to remember with this is all traps remaining are considered to be derelict or abandoned. So we can remove any trap within these closure areas that are left. The department or those designated by the commission can retrieve the traps. Traps can be removed between 1/2 hour between sunrise and 1/2 hour after sunset. They must be brought to the designated disposal site, and traps removed from within a closure area shall be considered abandoned on a property of the department, which goes back into us being able to designate the disposition of these traps for any outside projects that we may see. So these traps that are collected cannot be possessed outside of the area unless it's by the department. And with that, I can take questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, Peyton, with all the traps that we being collected during the, where does the department store all these traps? And then the second question is, if we collecting, over since 2004, and we got 57,000 traps, the average trap today, I think on the low side is $80 per trap. That is a tremendous amount of money. That's like $4.5 million worth of traps. So I'm just curious to see where this is going, and do we have any intentions that we can resell this or whatever? Just give me some explanation right there if you can.
Yeah. So first question. Storage. We do not have appropriate storage facilities for these traps. When you're removing, if we hit our average currently 3,700 traps in a year, we don't have the appropriate facilities for storage. So per the statute right now, without the disposition aside, everything is disposed of. A lot of these are disposed of through typical waste management procedures or through recycling. Our contractor partners with a recycler who actually provides dumpsters for free. So they're making their money back through the recycling of the metal. As far as the money goes and repurposing, we went down these roads of repurposing, trying to get traps back to the fishermen. Of the traps that we actually remove from the water, it's a much smaller percentage that you would deem fishable. Like this is a fishable trap right now. We could put it back into service without no work. So that's a much smaller percentage than the total number of traps we're recovering. We actually looked into the possibility of doing some work to go in and to resell them. We have to remove any commercial identifier from them. So that's additional work on our staff, housing of traps, hauling of traps, because, with a closure down in say the proposed St. Bernard, Biloxi Marsh closure, we're using either a private or public marina. Private marinas are not going to want us housing and storing traps on their property for security risk. Public areas, we can't store them also because they'll be stolen. So every day that we remove traps, those traps would have to be hauled. And if we're picking up 200 plus traps, you're talking about possibly having to get trucks to come in now to haul these traps. Then we run into the storage. Where are we storing them? So it's a lot of logistics that go into the possibility of what can we do, but we're still always looking in that direction as to what can we do.
Okay. We can't use them for coastal restoration.
We don't do coastal restoration. That's a different agency. But again, we have partnered with some NGOs that have put out some different projects for living shoreline projects and things like that. We are not opposed to those. We want to work with these different organizations to try to do things with these traps if suitable.
And we can't, I guess we don't have the place where we can just, because I guess you answered my question because of the tags that's in the traps. We can't just put it out for bid for a person to come in, bid, get whatever we could, because we'd have to remove the identity of that. And there's no way if someone bids on, gets it, that we can collect that identity. Because
Correct.
I know there's a lot of money involved with the traps other than the trap itself, because of all the rods that they got to put in them and everything else, that they do. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I just thought they may have a way to.
We circled
compensate
down that
someone.
road. There was a big enforcement issue. Resale of traps. A fisherman cannot be in possession of another fisherman's traps.
Right.
So without the work from our staff to remove all those identifiers, it was a no-go on that part. So we got to put in a lot of cleanup work to be able to get them in a position to be able to resell.
Well, it's an excellent program and, that we have, on that. And I'll make the motion that we accept the department's recommendation on the trap, the relic crab trap removal, right there as presented, because it's an excellent program. It's just too bad we can't find a way to compensate some of this money from the traps right there. So.
All right, thank you. So I
That's
have
it.
a motion on the floor to accept the department's recommendation and proposal for the notice of intent establishing closures for certain waters associated with the 2025 derelict crab trap removal program. Is there a second? I have a second by Commissioner Reynolds. Any commissioner comments before we vote the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. All right.
Thank you,
Next.
commissioners.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cagle. Next, we have receive and consider declaration of emergency to reopen the oyster season in the Atchafalaya East and West Cote Blanche Bays, Vermilion Bay Public Oyster Sea Grounds, presented by Mr. Robert Caballero from the Marine Fisheries Biologist.
Good morning, Commission. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Robert Caballero. I'm the biologist for the oyster program. I'm presenting a recommendation to reopen the public oyster areas in the Vermilion and Atchafalaya Bay Public Oyster Sea Grounds. The focus today will be on Coastal Study Area 6 in the Vermilion Bay, Atchafalaya Bay area that's circled in red. Some quick facts on this area. Its department doesn't have the reef acreages assessment for this area. I'm working to remedy this problem. Historically, the stock assessments are based on comparing annual oyster densities. And there's a lot of freshwater input into the system that causes the Department of Health to close most of these oyster areas throughout the year. I'm here today because the Oyster Task Force had received interest from oyster harvesters in the Vermilion Bay area to access the oyster resource on the state's public reefs. I presented some options to the Oyster Task Force and they motioned to recommend opening this area to oyster bedding as soon as possible to the end of August, when the Department of Health will close these areas to harvest. And I'll get into some later slides. They did not want to wait for a possible May opening in case the spring brought any increased river flow. And the OTF also didn't want to have to deal with any SAC limits for harvesters or having fishermen drive out to Marsh Island for just a daily SAC limit. They would like to see oyster harvesters go out, get the resource, and bring it back to their leases to harvest at their leisure. Wildlife and Fisheries Secretary Sheehan has delegated the authority from the commission. It ended on April 30th. The Louisiana Revised Statutes in Title 56 states that the extending or reopening of the season past April 30th falls to the commission. Also, the next oyster season cannot start till September 4th of this year. So as such, this recommendation is being a reopening of the 2023-24 oyster season. Title 56 also states that the commission should consider the recommendations of the Oyster Task Force. So here we can see that due to river discharge, these are the LDH closure lines for the Vermilion Bay. They usually close throughout the year. Currently, we here for till the end of August. We have some areas around Southern Marsh Island and Southwest Pass right there that are still open. Here's the closure lines for September. All but a small part is going to be closed. And this small part that's staying open is actually just some state leases. There's no actually public oyster grounds in that area. And so just to wrap up, the department has a narrow window of opportunity to reopen this oyster area in August before the Department of Health closes the area due to water quality issues. So the oyster industry has requested a reopening. The law allows it with commission approval. The harvest area will be open during August by LDH, but let's look at if there's any sufficient quantities of oysters available to harvest. So the oyster program completes its oyster stock assessment in July, performing quadrats, scuba diving on Louisiana public oyster reefs. Department compiles estimates on seaside oysters, which is about 1 to 3 inches, and sack or market oysters that are greater than 3 inches. Seed oyster bedding by oyster harvesters provide a crop on their leases, and sack-sized oysters can be harvested directly to market during an open market harvest season. Vermilion area had an overall increase in both seed and sack-sized oysters, exceeding its 20-year long-term average. With the lower Atchafalaya River levels, this area is still seeing a nice spat set with some growth in seed and sack-sized oysters. And you can see from the historical densities that this area sees good oyster abundances during drought cycles. And they just had one last year and it's still doing well. So here, most of the public oyster resource is on the reefs around Southwest Pass and Indian and Lighthouse Points and out on Nickel Reef. Lighthouse Point is seeing densities of 22.8 seed and 12.2 sack per square meter. Indian Point has densities of 8.2 seed and 3.4 sack per square meter. And Nickel Reef is upwards of 25.2 seed and 19.6 sacks per square meter. So oyster program, we don't have any issues with the Oyster Task Force request. Due to the 72-hour timing requirement for news releases, the season can't open until next Monday. This will be the map for the news release if y'all approve. The diagonal striped areas actually are outlined, show the actual areas open by LDH for oyster harvest. The other areas will be open, but they'll have to apply for an LDH relay permit to access the oyster resource in those areas. Additional oyster season regulations for the DE. We usually have the restriction of less than 15% non-living reef material and bedding loads. This is to restrict the removal of excess reef material. We also have restriction of sacks or containers during bedding. This is to prevent direct sale of market oysters during the bedding season. We also restrict market harvesting oysters and bedding during the same day. We also have reminder for the LDH permitting requirements for the LDH closed areas and requirement of unshackling oyster dredgers after harvesting hours. Also, the fishermen will still be required to use our electronic daily reporting to gather daily harvest estimate. This is this will be going into the 3rd year of requiring a daily harvest requirement. This past seasons, we finally got our electronic reporting app, and it was used. We had about 26% of vessels using our app last season, and we had a good 98% of vessels reporting at some point during the oyster season for the daily requirement. I had a nice video. I'll send you a link. I know I don't want to spare y'all time today, but I'll send y'all the link so y'all can look through our walkthrough for our e-reporting app. It wasn't available last season for the commission, but we had it available for sent out to the fishermen via a QRL code, and it's on the website. And it just a walkthrough for the fishermen to access the electronic reporting app. Any questions?
Go ahead, Kevin.
I have one, just to understand the seeding. So the oyster fishermen go to the seed ground, take the oysters and move them to a different reef? The seed, I want to understand the seeding.
Yeah, so historically, the public oyster grounds has been a source for seed and baby oysters for the oyster industry.
Right.
So we have a partnership with private lease, well, state leases for the industry, and they'll come to the public grounds and they'll bed the seed and they'll bring it back to their private leases where they'll have it throughout the course of the year or for next year's crop. And they can harvest it at their leisure and grow it like any other crop would.
Okay. And it's just done the regular way with tongs like they normally do. There's not dredging or any of
No,
that.
this is all dredging in this area.
This is all dredging.
We
in that
only
area?
have one tonging only area in Lake
Tongue
Calhoun.
is Lake Calhoun.
Yes,
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Ms. Blanchard?
My question is, we opening up the sea in such a large area right there, will that interfere with anything, the oyster boats fishing, where shrimp boats could be fishing?
It could
I know
possibly.
you're gonna have a large amount of boats up in that, I say a large amount, we don't have that many boats in either or industry right there, but it's not gonna cause a conflict, should I say, between the two boats. You know, the oyster fisherman dredging the shrimp boat, you know, he's pulling a skimmer boat or his otter trawl. You know, I'm just looking at any type of complications they could have.
I don't have any information to help answer that question, but it's definitely something we'll be looking at during the
Yeah,
course of the season.
Yeah, I know it's gonna come up, you know, right there, because you know, if you got a guy that's dredging oysters and then you got a guy that's pulling his shrimp net, one's gonna be fussing at the other. I can assure you on that if they in the way, because it's such a large area that we opening up. And we need to open it up, you know, because if not, we're gonna lose that harvest of oysters, you know, right there. You know, so I have nothing, you know, against opening up, other than the conflict, we're opening up, you know, an oyster bed that's oyster reefs that's very popular for shrimp, where these guys in the western part, they shrimp right over these reefs right here. So, you know, just be prepared for enforcement. That's all. Other than that, you know,
Thank you, Commissioner Blanchard. What we'll do is we'll get with the department and have them discuss the logistics if it comes up to an issue.
That's fine.
All right. Any other commissioner comments or questions on this item? All right. You need a motion and a vote from us, correct?
Correct.
All right. The gentleman from Lake Providence who has the largest oyster seed ground has moved that we reopen the oyster season in the Atchafalaya East and West Coast Launch and Vermilion Bay Public Seed Ground. Is there a second? All right, the gentleman from the Abbeville area, who I think is impacted by this, has made a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. Last item of the day is to receive any public comment from the public on any of the items that we have gone through thus far. All right, seeing that the public has abandoned their ship of public comments, we will then move for the motion of adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? All right, motion second, adjourn.